Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Geraghty of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
Really glad to have you with us for the Monday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. Jim Geraghty is back. Thank you very much to Scott Bertram, Inez Stetman, John Gabriel, and Brian Westbury for filling in for Jim while he was out. And if you follow Jim on Twitter or X, and you really should be, you now know that in the last less than 6 months, Jim has survived 2 weeks in Ukraine. That's not even to mention surviving the blizzard in Des Moines earlier in the year. Right. He survived a moose situation up on the NR Alaska cruise at a stopover. And now he has survived the remnants of a hurricane while on vacation in South Carolina. And so, Jim, if you can just survive the insanity of the Democratic National Convention next week, you should be in the clear.
Chicago, Democratic National Convention, lots of people angry, the pro-Hamas crowd, angry about Israel and all that stuff. What's the worst that could happen? There was somebody on Twitter who observed, I am accumulating the wildest, craziest, and most dangerous travel record since Tom Hanks. As usual, you should never travel with Tom Hanks. Either the spaceship goes off course, the Somali pirates hijack his boat, he gets the FedEx plane goes down. He gets stuck on a desert island. Never go anywhere with Tom Hanks. I'm not quite that bad. Thankfully, Hurricane Debby, or what was left of it, was it was a big storm. We're getting around it. Some very minor flooding in my parents' house. We managed to clean most of it up with the shop vac. So all in all, not that bad. They were talking about 18 inches of rain, 30 inches of rain, and I think we got over a course of like 12. I mean, nothing to sneeze at, but not nearly as bad as it could have been. So, hey, I had a great time. Always happy to see people. Any vacation you can walk away from is a good one, much like airplane landings.
Exactly. So you have survived the huge cold snap and snow, and now hurricane. So I just want to find out how this all fits into the next Dangerous Click novel, because it's all going to be there. It's just a matter
I've run around in my head, how can I have a moose attack take place in the middle of all that? I should point out, it wasn't a moose attack. It simply was a close encounter with a moose that, all over Denali Park, it says, do not approach moose. It doesn't say anything about what you're supposed to do when the moose keeps approaching you. It's very, it's a very friendly moose.
Exactly.
Illegal.
Exactly. Well, we're glad you're safe. We're glad everybody's safe, and hopefully you had a good time despite the severe weather. But let's dig in here. I'm sure you paid attention to what was going on to some extent in our politics as you were gone. But we actually have a good martini today. Last week we kind of ducked around it on a lot of different days. But hats off to Glenn Youngkin, the governor of Virginia. This was last week, but it definitely bears mentioning. Glenn Youngkin on Wednesday issued an executive order to codify election security procedures the administration has put into place. Quote, every legal vote deserves to be counted without being watered down by illegal votes or inaccurate machines. In Virginia, we don't play games, and our model for election security is working. We use 100% paper ballots with a strict chain of custody. If you've ever voted in Virginia, and I'm guessing other places do this as well, paper ballot, you fill it in with a pen, you put it into the machine tabulates it, but you still have the paper records of the ballots in case there are any questions later on, and they have a specific chain of custody. Now, in addition to all that, and he says they monitor their drop boxes 24/7. That's the next best thing to not having drop boxes, in my opinion. But they also cleaned up the voter rolls, Jim, which is the big part of the good martini here. And in the process of cleaning up the voter rolls, they found 80,000 dead people that they had to remove. And they also found more than 6,300 non-citizens that somehow got registered to vote. My guess is getting a driver's license or some other thing that usually coincides with the ability to register to vote. And of course, they also removed people who have moved out of Virginia. And so, Jim, first of all, this is just simple due diligence on the part of the Virginia government. This is the kind of thing you want your government to be spending its time on, to ensure that the people who should be voting get the maximum value of their votes. It doesn't mean that, there were nefarious plots, but if you remove the opportunity for that, it certainly makes your elections even more secure. And I would hazard to say, Jim, that in this digital era, there's no excuse for any state not to be doing this on a regular basis.
Yeah, I mean, we just had the Trump campaign get hacked. Another demonstration about how what you think are secure computer systems sometimes aren't. You never know when somebody's going to fall for a phishing attack or click on this link for a free whatever. You cannot idiot-proof any system or organization. That's why paper ballots are much easier. I've been voting in Virginia since 2007. It's always run smoothly. Maybe the first time when I asked for a Republican primary ballot, the guy behind the desk was like, "Why?" That was the worst experience I've had. Republicans have won in Virginia and Democrats have won in Virginia. We've seen lands like I don't understand. This is the kind of a classic purple state, not necessarily in presidential elections, but it's a fairly competitive state, and it seems to work for everybody. Not only you get there, and you've done this. I'm sure all of our listeners in Virginia have. You go there, you show your photo ID, in my case, a driver's license, and then they look at it and they ask you, "What is your address?" Mm-hmm. Now, this is a very basic question, but if you flub it, that gives them a reason for concern. Why does this person, not know where they live, and why is their description of their address not match the ID that they provided? And I don't hear Democrats saying that Virginia is some sort of oppressive hellhole that won't allow you to vote or something like that. This is basic hygiene. I periodically yell at my teenagers, "You're supposed to shower once a day." You should be going through your voter rolls, and you should be finding out who the dead people are. I don't expect people to know that very second, they flat line. I expect them to go, but like a couple of months minimum, this is not, an extraordinary, you go through the death records. The government keeps records of who's died, and you think, here's a list, here's another list, here's the list of voters. We should be able to check that, right? Somebody moves out of state, maybe they don't file the change of address cards or something like that, but this seems like the sort of thing, the basics, this is blocking and tackling. This is what you're supposed to do if you're running this. And, the fact that they found this significant number of people who are dead, significant number of people who are not citizens. How did they end up on that voter roll list in the first place? I don't really how many times have they voted? Why are these people who are not, this is all very basic. Kudos to Glenn Youngkin. He had some bumps in the road earlier this year when he was trying to get the arena over here for the Wizards and But Glenn Youngkin has had a strong rebound, I would argue, and there was never very likely he was going to be Trump's running mate. But just basic stuff like this, boy, isn't it just kind of nice to have a competent Republican governor who just goes out and does the basics of government that's supposed to be done? And oh, by the way, the fact that if any Democrat is objecting to this, the more you object to basics like this, the more I think that you're up to there's shenanigans going on.
Exactly right. No, I've lived in Virginia for over a quarter century, and Glenn Youngkin's the best governor we've had. George Allen we had for a couple months right after I got here. Gilmore was pretty good. He tried to get rid of the car tax, didn't get rid of all of it, but he didn't raise my taxes like Bob McDonnell, who also had some other issues. And anyway, of the whole bunch.
Let me show off my fancy Rolex here. Yeah. Would you like some supplements, Greg?
So anyway, so Youngkin is probably the best governor we've had. And yes, the more you protest, the more it looks bad. I remember when some states wanted to clean up their voter rolls back in the Obama era, and Eric Holder's like, no, we're not gonna let you do that. Voting Rights Act and so forth. But yes, you mentioned when people die, you should have an automatic way when the county or whoever records those deaths, send it to your state capital, and then automatically those get wiped out when somebody registers in a new state because they've moved. There should be some way that the new state informs the old state, hey, we've got this voter now. Kick them off the roll, or whatever it has to be done. And certainly there should be safeguards in place for non-citizens, for heaven's sake, for getting on the roll. So other states, I don't know how much time you've got left to do this before early voting starts and so forth. But as a guy who was stuck on Michigan's voter rolls, despite my and my family's efforts to get me off until at least 2020, Jim, even though I moved in the late 90s, because when they sent out the automatic absentee ballot applications in 2020, and my mom still got one for me. And who knows what would have happened with that if my mom didn't still live at that address. So you just never know what's going to happen if you're not constantly diligent on stuff like this. Virginia is. Hopefully other states are as well. All right, let's talk about great sponsors for today and talk about keeping it simple, not only with your voter rolls, but with your metabolic health. Wake up in the morning, take a deep breath, and breathe into your Lumen to find out what's going on with your metabolism. Lumen is the world's first handheld metabolic coach. It measures your metabolism through your breath, and on the app, it lets you know if you're burning fat or carbs, and then gives you tailored guidance to improve your nutrition, workout, sleep, and even stress management.
Your metabolism is your body's engine. It's how your body turns the food that you eat into the fuel that keeps you going. And because your metabolism is at the center of everything your body does, optimal metabolic health translates to a whole bunch of benefits, including easier weight management, improved energy levels, better fitness results, better sleep, you name it. Lumen gives you recommendations to improve your metabolic health.
So again, it guides your metabolic health really well, and it could not be simpler. So if you want to take the next step in improving your health, go to lumen.me/3ml to get 15% off your Lumen. That's lumen.me/3ml for 15% off your purchase. Again, that's lumen.me/3ml. Thank you, Lumen, for sponsoring this episode. All right, Jim, on to our bad martini now. And, you know, of all the different ways that the media has served as cheerleaders with the pom-poms for Kamala Harris here and trying to rehabilitate her image from the doldrums of well below 40% in a lot of approval polls before Joe Biden stepped aside in this 2024 campaign, to now basically talking about how it's a vibe election and the vibes are all with her, and it's a campaign full of joy, and basically as many vague words as you can possibly use instead of trying to actually get her to be accountable for the record that she and Biden have accumulated over the past nearly 4 years. But you would at least expect the media to want her to speak to the media. But no, we can't even get that anymore. David Bauder over at the Associated Press last week, during Kamala Harris's thrill ride, that's what he said, thrill ride, that has upended the 2024 presidential campaign, journalists for the most part have been on the outside looking in. The vice president hasn't given an interview and has barely engaged with reporters since becoming the Democratic choice to replace Joe Biden. That's about to change now that it has become a campaign issue. But for journalists, the larger lesson is that their role as presidential gatekeepers is probably diminishing forever. Harris travels with reporters on Air Force Two and frequently talks to them, but her campaign staff insists the conversations are off the record. Outside of the plane on Thursday, she approached cameras and notebooks to publicly answer some questions, and one of them was about when she would sit down for an in-depth interview. She said, "I've talked to my team. I want to get an interview together by the end of the month," which would be 1.5 months into a 3.5-month campaign. So talk about running the four corners offense here. But basically the article's point here, Jim, is that, you know, campaigns really just want to control the message here, and putting candidates out there when they can't control the message or the questions is kind of a risk. Look what happened to Trump at the sit down with the black journalists in Chicago. The story ended up being that he questioned what race Kamala Harris actually was. So, you know, there's really not much incentive for them to do it. So if it doesn't happen anytime soon, it's really not a big deal. It's just all about the way the campaign does stuff. Jim, that's their business. How do you not push for more interviews and more access?
I suppose we should give the Associated Press a molecule of credit, that, you know, one molecule, for acknowledging that she has not done any interviews in the roughly 3 weeks since she became the nominee. Officially, she became the nominee like the first week of August, but you know, within hours, it was clear there was not going to be any serious challenge to her becoming the nominee. By the way, so she says, I'm going to try to schedule it, but not going to hold it by the end. I'm going to try to schedule it by the end of the month.
Yes.
I asked this of Hugh Hewitt this morning. Greg, do you know when early voting starts?
September.
In Pennsylvania, it begins September 16th.
Wow.
Now, not everyone's going to rush out and vote that day, but usually it's September 20th. That's where it is. Virginia, Minnesota, and I believe Vermont is the third state that does it that early. Now, you'd like to think that the Democratic nominee for president would sit down to have one on-camera interview by the time people start voting. That seems like a really reasonable expectation. We're not setting the bar too high, right? She did take a brief, and I mean exceptionally brief, availability with reporters in front of the cameras when her Air Force Two is outside Detroit. She took 6 questions. None of her answers were more than 2 sentences. And one of them was, you know, when are you going to do that? She says, I'll try to schedule it by the end of the month, which is an absolutely absurd level inaccessibility. Look, we've kind of reached a point that basically presidents and presidential candidates don't feel a need to be available and to take these kinds of questions. Biden began, you could argue about when this began, but clearly Biden began this with the basement campaign. He promised, and Jen Psaki said, they're going to be the most open and accessible presidency of all time. And then he did far fewer interviews and press conferences than any of his 6 predecessors. Then Harris has become, and Harris hasn't done anything. I believe the last time Kamala Harris did a press conference was late 2023. It's been more than a year. She just doesn't do these sorts of things. She may have done a few more, interviews, in the earlier part of the year, but you didn't get this many access. I mentioned Elena Plot Cabrera. I think I'm remembering her new married name. Got a lot of access in the Atlantic. So it's not like she completely closed off, but since she's become the nominee, we know it's supposed to all be about coconut tree memes, and it's all about the vibes, and it's all, and I'd like to give other columnists lots of grief about this. I nearly used other words. Writing about the vibes and writing about she's brought the joy back to the campaign. Yes, Joy Behar. And this idea, but what are they supposed to do? Write about the policy section of the Kamala Harris for President website? There is none. What are they supposed to do? Analyze her policy proposals? She doesn't have any. They can go back and say, well, in 2020 she campaigned this, but we got a statement from Harris press aides. Oh, that's not her position anymore. Well, what is her position? We'll let you know. Harris Walz 2024. It's the Nancy Pelosi approach to Obamacare applied to a presidential candidate. You have to elect Kamala Harris in order to see what's in her.
That is very well said. It's just fascinating to watch. First of all, she now thinks that no taxes for tips is good. So I guess that's one policy position.
That's that's income. I know Trump did it. I thought it was blatant pandering. Well, okay, to both, the service industry out in Las Vegas and Nevada, but also to strippers. I'm not going to say the strippers aren't hardworking. I'm not going to say that they don't go out there and earn their money like everybody else. But there's no reason you're tipped. Okay, we shouldn't tax you anymore. Or at some point, we could talk to Radio America and National Review and the Washington Post to convert all of our income to tips. So
that would be nice. I heard an interview last week when they finally agreed to actually do the ABC debate on September 10th. And the local news station here, WTOP, is a CBS affiliate, and they had Major Garrett on analyzing. And I don't dislike Major Garrett. He actually said that Kamala Harris is the change candidate and Donald Trump is closest to being the incumbent candidate. I have no idea how you can actually come to that conclusion when it's the sitting vice president, which he acknowledged, obviously, but he obviously thinks somehow that she's the one who would be more different than Joe Biden, which is absurd.
Greg, look, cost of living and inflation is high. The border is completely insecure. There's chaos overseas. You can't expect the vice president of the United States to have any control over federal policy in the executive branch. She's just the vice president. She's there to do coconut tree memes, okay? That's what she's all about. And semi-seriously, apparently the Financial Times has a poll saying that Harris is more trusted on the economy than Donald Trump by a narrow margin, but you'd think it wouldn't be close at all. And my suspicion is that voters, or at least close to half the electorate, doesn't blame Kamala Harris for the Biden administration economic policies because they have no idea what she's been doing for the last 3.5 years.
It could be. So she gets away with
built-in defense. Nobody trusts me with anything. You can't hold me responsible for anything that's been done.
So she gets away with saying, I'm going to do this on day one, when we were all sitting here going, well, it's about
what are you
day
doing?
12.
Yeah, you go.
It's day 1200. What have you been doing?
I'm sorry. She could go to the White House. Pardon me. She could go to Rehoboth Beach, and where Joe Biden works from 10 to 4. She could make an appointment anytime between 10 and 4 when he's lucid, and she could say, hey, Joe, I think we should do this. But, she doesn't do that.
No. And here's how she's going to run out the clock. She's not going to do any interviews before the end of the convention. I'm convinced, unless you can, somehow corner her in the hallway at the United Center. But then she'll probably not try to do anything until Labor Day, unless she tries to bury it on Labor Day weekend in case it goes badly. Then you've got the debate on September 10th. And if she thinks she won that debate, she will agree to no more debates. And then we're a week away from early voting starting, and she'll do her best to run out the clock without really getting on the record much at all about what she has done and what she wants to do and how she'd be different than her 2020 campaign. So obviously a much different campaign, given it's a sprint from mid-July on. But the amount of space the media is giving her without too much pushback is telling, very telling. All right, Jim, brand new sponsor today, and that is Oracle. And look, artificial intelligence might be the most important new computer technology ever. It has the potential to transform every industry, altering the way we work, live, and interact with the world. It's revolutionizing every industry with billions of dollars being invested, so you need to buckle up. But how do you compete without costs spiraling out of control? Take a free test drive of OCI at oracle.com/martini.
It's time to upgrade to the next generation of the cloud, Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. OCI offers a complete range of cloud services to meet your needs, whether on-premises, hybrid, multi-cloud, or public. Its global network and flexible options tackle your toughest business challenges. OCI is a single platform for your infrastructure, database, application development, and AI needs. OCI has 4 to 8 times the bandwidth of other clouds. It offers one consistent price instead of variable regional pricing, and all kinds of industry leaders rely on Oracle, from Zoom to Mazda to Toyota.
Now you can train your AI models at twice the speed and less than half the cost of other clouds. Do more and spend less, like Uber, 8x8, and Databricks Mosaic. Take a free test drive of OCI at oracle.com/martini. That's oracle.com/martini. oracle.com/martini. All right, Jim, as you mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, you were on vacation last week visiting your parents. You're a good son. Let's talk about the governor of Minnesota, Tim Walz, the vice presidential candidate, soon to be vice presidential nominee. This is a clip from when he was governor during COVID, and he's talking about how he couldn't bring his mom, who had just gone through heart surgery at 87 years old, to live with him. Because, man, just think of all the tough headlines I'd have to deal with if I had brought her to live with us.
My 87-year-old mother had heart surgery. We isolated her. Our goal was to bring her up here and live with us for a while. We can't bring her. So she is alone. We're dropping groceries at the door. We have to, because otherwise what that front page story is going to go on day after day after day.
What he's not telling you is that Tim Walz, based on that, wouldn't let you bring your mother to live with you because of COVID restrictions. You have to stay isolated. You gotta stay inside the 4 walls of your immediate family. And so he was worried that he was going to get negative headlines for doing something he was telling everybody else not to do, which tells you that it's a stupid policy. If you can't take care of your own mother, I think that's a risk most people would be willing to run. But apparently Tim Walz didn't think you should have the ability to make that decision.
So in Oliver Twist, Mr. Bumble, who I gave a legendary performance out of in the Metuchen High School theater program, declares the law is an ass. I hope I'm allowed to use that word on our podcast. I'm quoting Charles Dickens. It's a very high-minded literary reference to using that. If the law will not allow you to take care of your mother at a time when she's sick, then the law is an ass, and the law should not be the law. And it's like the Tim Walz couldn't see that. And he's like, well, I'd better not do that because people will accuse me of being a hypocrite, which, by the way, they would. I mean, I suppose we should give him, again, a molecule of credit for not French laundrying it the way Gavin Newsom did, of saying, well, look, the laws are for you people, all right? I'm perfectly healthy. I'm going to go out and do that stuff. But I saw this, and I was reminded of Chris Rock's joke, or his explanation, really, of why he doesn't tell jokes about Eminem. He pointed out that, like, when Eminem makes a song, it's all over. It's on the hip hop stations. Sometimes it's even on the country stations. It's on the top 40 stations. It's all over. And his attitude is, if Eminem is willing to say that stuff about his own mother, what is he going to say about you? He doesn't even know you. So paraphrasing that, if Tim Walz is willing to do that to his own mother, imagine what he's willing to do to you, right? Not even his mom could get a morsel of sympathy or compassion during the peak of the pandemic. Like, do you want this man to be a heartbeat away from the presidency? I want this man in an insane asylum. So, yeah, good job there. Yeah. Good call, Harris. Let me put it this way. Andrew Cuomo was like, man, that guy's a bastard.
I guess the only positive thing we can say about him during COVID and his draconian measures is he wasn't one of the nursing home mandate governors, but that's pretty faint praise. Cuomo, Whitmer.
That's a really
Wolf,
low bar
Murphy.
to clear.
This is unconscionable. And his state, and I'm sure others were the ones telling you couldn't even have more than 5 or 10 people at your grandmother's funeral and all that kind of stuff, and just making life miserable. We had friends who their loved ones were dying, and they were literally sitting outside of windows in the frigid temperatures because they weren't allowed to spend 5 minutes with their dying loved one in a nursing home. Don't forget about that stuff. Governments actually did that to you. Don't forget that. And then this is just another vivid example of Tim Walz not only isolating his own mother, but being proud of it. So it's just...
Yeah. Look, for obvious, I think the DeSantis primary campaign demonstrated that the country and even Republicans had psychologically moved on from COVID and did not want to relitigate those fights. I think that's wrong. I think that's bad. Oh, by the way, this is all, 90% chances of a lab leak. Anybody want to hold China accountable over that? Nah. Okay. All right.
Nah.
There were some abominable, abysmal decisions made by people during the pandemic that had really serious consequences for people's life, people who are fighting addiction, people who need to put off elective health procedures. And, if we're not doing the visual part, you can't tell I'm making air quotes as I say that. The learning loss, like this, the decisions made by panicking members of government had real and in some cases devastating consequences for people's lives. And we've held very few people accountable. Really, the only person who paid much of a price for it was Terry McAuliffe. Wasn't even in office during it, but he became the scapegoat.
That's a good point. Yeah, but even in 2022, people weren't focusing on that as much as I would have expected them to, when some of those policies lingered into 2022. But anyway, after whatever it is now, 2-3 years of reflection, it would appear that there's not a single regret from some of these people on what they made their constituents go through. Anyway, Jim, glad to have you back. We'll do it again tomorrow. See you then.
See you tomorrow, Greg.
Jim Geraghty, National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks for being with us today. Do subscribe to the podcast if you don't already. Tell your friends about us as well. Thanks also for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. Please keep those coming. Get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch podcast. Follow us both on X. He's at Jim Geraghty. I'm at Dateline_DC. Have a great Monday and join us again on Tuesday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.